I've been with my wife, Stephanie, for 7 years, married for 5. When we met, she was the type of woman who could light up a room, always the center of attention, always smiling. Back then, I thought it was one of her best qualities. She had a magnetic personality, and her energy was infectious. I was completely captivated by her, and after a whirlwind romance, I popped the question. Life seemed perfect. For the first few years, things were smooth. We worked hard, built a home together, and even started talking about having kids. Family has always been important to me. I dreamed of being a father, of building something real and lasting. Stephanie was always supportive, or so I thought. But looking back now, I can see that things started to shift about a year ago. At first, the changes were subtle. Stephanie started spending more time on her phone. She claimed she was scrolling through social media or chatting with her girlfriends. She also started going out more often, saying she needed girl time to unwind. I didn't question it at first. I trusted her. But then the late nights became more frequent. She'd come home smelling like expensive perfume that I hadn't bought for her, and she'd brush it off with excuses like, "Oh, it's just from hugging someone at the restaurant." Or, "My friend sprayed it on me while we were shopping." I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I convinced myself I was overthinking it. After all, I worked long hours and I wasn't always home. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Still, there were moments when the nagging doubts crept in. She'd be overly protective of her phone, snapping it away whenever I came near. If I asked her what she was up to, she'd roll her eyes and call me insecure. Things took a turn for the worse a few months ago. Stephanie started criticizing me over the smallest things, how I folded the laundry, the way I cooked dinner, even the way I breathed. It felt like nothing I did was good enough anymore. She'd make snide remarks, calling me boring, or joking that I'd let myself go. At one point, she outright suggested I should hit the gym if I wanted to keep up with her. The words stung, but I didn't want to fight. I thought maybe she was stressed or going through something she wasn't ready to share. I tried to be patient, to give her space. I even started planning a romantic getaway to reignite the spark. But deep down, a voice kept whispering that something wasn't right. The tipping point came during a party at a mutual friend's house last weekend. Stephanie had insisted we go, saying it would be good for us to get out of the house. At first, everything seemed normal. We mingled with friends, had a few drinks, and enjoyed the festive atmosphere. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Stephanie was glued to her little group of friends, laughing and chatting like she didn't have a care in the world. I decided to step outside for some fresh air and to clear my head. That's when it happened. Standing on the patio, I could see Stephanie through the glass doors. She was laughing with her friends, her hand resting lightly on the arm of some guy I didn't recognize. I wasn't close enough to hear their conversation, but I could see the way she was looking at him, the same way she used to look at me. My stomach churned, but I told myself I was imagining things. Then, one of her friends leaned in and said something, and my jaw dropped. Standing on the patio, watching Stephanie through the glass doors, I felt a chill run down my spine. Her laughter echoed, loud and carefree, as though the tension in our marriage was a distant memory for her. She leaned in close to her friend Ashley, the one who always struck me as a little too nosy and a little too smug. Then Ashley's words cut through the air like a blade. "She's still juggling both of them? God, Steph, you're wild." I froze. Juggling both of them? What the hell did that mean? My heart hammered as I tried to process what I'd just heard. Stephanie threw her head back and laughed, loud and shrill. She glanced around, as if checking to make sure I wasn't nearby, then responded in a lower voice I couldn't quite make out. The group erupted into giggles, and the guy next to her, tall, broad, and annoyingly confident, leaned in closer. I felt a wave of nausea. My mind raced through every possibility, each one worse than the last. Who was she juggling? Was this about work? A joke I didn't understand? Or was it exactly what it sounded like? A confession of infidelity disguised as casual gossip? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought the urge to storm inside and demand an explanation right there and then. But something stopped me. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Stay calm. If you confront her now, she'll just deny it. You need proof." So I stayed outside, lurking in the shadows like some desperate fool. I pulled out my phone and started recording the scene through the glass, zooming in just enough to capture her face and the way she was practically draped over this guy. Felt dirty and wrong, but I needed evidence. I needed to know the truth. When Stephanie finally stepped away from the group to grab a drink, I slipped back inside. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her texts under the guise of looking for my phone charger in her bag. She'd always been so secretive with her phone, and now I knew why. There it was. A string of messages from someone saved as Mark Work. My stomach dropped as I read the first few texts. "Mark, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we sneak away again? Stephanie." "Sure. You'll get me in trouble face-blowing a kiss next week when he's working late?" There were more. Dozens, maybe hundreds. But my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't read them all. The casual tone, the emojis, the blatant disregard for me. It was all too much. She didn't even bother to hide it. I stuffed the phone back into her bag and stormed into the bathroom. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my face pale and sweaty, my eyes wild. This couldn't be real. Stephanie, my wife, the woman I'd planned to grow old with, was sneaking around with someone else. And she wasn't even sorry about it. When I finally managed to compose myself, I returned to the party. Stephanie was back with her friends, laughing like nothing had happened. I wanted to confront her right there, to scream and demand answers, but I couldn't make a scene. Not yet. I needed to figure out what to do next. That's when I saw the guy, Mark. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping a drink and smirking like he owned the place. My blood boiled as I realized he was the same guy she'd been cozying up to earlier. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they painted made me sick. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, Stephanie walked over to him. She brushed against him, her hand lingering on his arm, and whispered something in his ear. He laughed, low and cocky, and handed her a folded piece of paper. She glanced around quickly, then stuffed it into her purse. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was spinning with anger, humiliation, and a deep, gut-wrenching pain. I needed to leave before I did something I'd regret. So I grabbed my coat and left the party without saying a word. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the time I got home that night, my hands were still trembling. I replayed the scene from the party over and over in my mind. Her laughter, that smug bastard Mark, the folded note she'd hidden so quickly. My stomach churned with a toxic mix of rage and heartbreak. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. When Stephanie walked through the door an hour later, she looked surprised to see me. "Oh, you left early," she said casually, kicking off her heels. "I thought you were having fun." Having fun? The audacity of her words made my blood boil. "Fun?" I snapped. "Yeah. Watching my wife flirt with some guy at a party is a real blast." She froze for a second, then quickly recovered, plastering on her innocent smile. "Flirting? Are you serious right now?" "I was just talking to friends." "You're overreacting." Her gaslighting hit me like a slap to the face. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me. Not this time. I pulled out my phone, opened the video I'd recorded, and shoved it in her face. "Explain this," I demanded. Her eyes widened as she watched herself laughing and leaning into Mark. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face, but then she rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Oh, for God's sake, you're spying on me now? That's pathetic." "No, what's pathetic?" I shot back. "Is sneaking around with someone else and thinking I wouldn't notice. Do you really think I'm that stupid, Stephanie?" She crossed her arms and glared at me. "What are you even talking about? You have no idea what you're accusing me of." That's when I decided to drop the bombshell. "Mark," I said, spitting his name like it was poison. "I saw the texts. Last night was amazing? Sneak away again? How long has this been going on?" Her face drained of color, and for the first time she didn't have a snarky comeback. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was scrambling for an excuse. Finally, she settled on denial. You went through my phone? That's such a violation of my privacy. I can't believe you'd stoop that low. I laughed bitterly. Privacy? Are you serious? You're cheating on me, and you're worried about privacy. She threw her hands in the air. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Mark. But it's not what you think. We're just friends, and sometimes I vent to him about our problems because, honestly, you've been so distant lately. Her words hit me like a truck. Not only was she admitting to seeing him, but she was also trying to blame me for it. The sheer audacity left me momentarily speechless. Our problems, I finally managed to say. The only problem here is that you're a liar and a cheat. She scoffed. Oh, please, don't act like you're perfect. You've been so boring and predictable lately. All you do is work and sit around the house. Mark makes me feel alive. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to find that elsewhere. Her words cut deeper than any knife. All the years I'd spent building a life for us, working long hours to give her everything she wanted. And this was my reward? To be told I wasn't enough, that I wasn't exciting enough for her? It was like she was twisting the knife just for the fun of it. But then I remembered the note. The one Mark had handed her at the party. My anger flared again as I pointed at her purse. What about the note? The one he gave you tonight? What's in it? Her eyes darted to the bag, and I could see the panic returning. It's nothing, she said quickly, moving toward it. Just something stupid. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I wasn't about to let her get away with another lie. I grabbed the bag before she could, yanked it open, and pulled out the folded piece of paper. She lunged for it, but I held it out of her reach. Let's see what's so stupid, shall we? The note was short, but it was enough to make my vision go red. Can't wait for our next night together. My place at 8? He'll never know. He'll never know, huh? I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Well, guess what, Stephanie? I know now. She didn't even bother denying it anymore. Instead, she glared at me with that same smug expression that used to make me love her confidence but now just made me sick. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? Yes, I've been sleeping with Mark. And you know what? I don't even regret it. At least he treats me like I matter. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Her words hung in the air, cruel and unapologetic. She wasn't just cheating. She was reveling in it. She wanted to hurt me, to tear me down. And for what? To justify her own selfish behavior? I took a step back, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. You're unbelievable, I said quietly. All these years, I've been working my ass off for us. For this marriage, and this is how you repay me? She shrugged, completely unbothered. Maybe if you'd put as much effort into our relationship as you do into your job, we wouldn't be here. That was it, the final straw. I knew then that there was no saving this. No apology, no therapy, no amount of forgiveness could undo the damage she'd done. But I wasn't done with her. Not yet. After Stephanie's cold, unapologetic confession, I didn't say another word. Couldn't. My throat felt tight, my chest heaved with anger, and my mind buzzed with 1,000 thoughts. I stood there, staring at her as she leaned against the counter with a smug smirk on her face, completely unbothered by the emotional wreckage she'd caused. I'm done talking, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Go to bed. I'll deal with this in the morning. She rolled her eyes. Whatever. I'm tired of this drama anyway. She grabbed her purse and sauntered off to the bedroom, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb on our marriage. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her laughing with Mark, her friends giggling at my expense, that note mocking me. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the way she reveled in it, the way she tore me down without a shred of remorse. She was cruel, calculating, and completely devoid of the woman I thought I'd married. As the hours ticked by, the pain turned to anger, and the anger turned to something darker. I knew I couldn't just let this go. Divorce was inevitable, but that wasn't enough. She needed to feel what I felt. She needed to know that actions have consequences. And Mark, that smug bastard, needed to learn, too. Stephanie acted like nothing had happened. She came downstairs dressed in one of her expensive workout outfits, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look at me. "I'm going to yoga," she said casually, grabbing her keys. "We can talk later if you're done sulking." I didn't respond. I just nodded, letting her think I was defeated. The moment the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. If she thought she could walk all over me, she was about to learn otherwise. First, I grabbed her phone. She always left it unlocked when she went to yoga because she thought I was too clueless to notice. I scrolled through her texts again, taking screenshots of every incriminating message between her and Mark. I found photos, too, selfies of them together at restaurants, in his car, and even in our bedroom. My stomach turned, but I kept going. I needed as much ammo as I could get. Next, I called our bank. Stephanie didn't know that I had a separate account she couldn't access. Over the years, I'd quietly saved a decent amount of money just in case of emergencies. I transferred half of our joint account into my personal one. It wasn't stealing, it was protecting myself. After all, she'd already proven she couldn't be trusted. Then came the best part, the revenge plan. I knew Stephanie had a big event coming up, a work gala where she'd be in the spotlight, surrounded by colleagues and friends. She'd been bragging about it for weeks, talking about how she planned to impress everyone with her charm and style. I decided that would be the perfect stage for my revelation. Over the next few days, I played the role of the clueless husband. I acted subdued but compliant, letting her think she'd gotten away with everything. Meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes to set the trap. I printed out the screenshots of her messages with Mark and the photos they'd taken together. I put everything into a neat little folder labeled Stephanie's Secrets. I also added a note, "To everyone here tonight, meet the real Stephanie." It was petty, sure, but after what she'd done to me, I didn't care. On the night of the gala, Stephanie dressed to the nines, wearing a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "You're coming, right?" she asked as she applied her lipstick. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She beamed, completely oblivious. "Good. Try not to embarrass me. Okay?" The venue was packed with people. Stephanie's coworkers, clients, and even a few higher-ups from her company. She worked the room like a pro, laughing and flirting, basking in the attention. I stayed in the background, watching her with a mixture of disgust and grim satisfaction. She had no idea what was coming. When the time was right, I slipped away and handed the folder to the event's AV guy. I'd paid him a little extra to make sure the contents of the folder were displayed on the big screen during Stephanie's speech. He didn't ask questions, he just nodded and took the envelope. Finally, the moment arrived. Stephanie stood at the podium, smiling as she thanked everyone for coming and talked about how proud she was of her accomplishments. She was in her element, soaking up the applause. And then the screen behind her lit up. The room went dead silent as the first text appeared. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for our next night together." Gasps rippled through the crowd as more messages flashed across the screen, followed by the photos of her and Mark. Stephanie froze, her face turning a sickly shade of pale as the audience whispered and pointed. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, spinning around to face the screen. But it was too late. Everyone had seen it. I stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. Mark, who was also at the gala, tried to slip out unnoticed, but someone called him out, and the crowd turned on him, too. It was glorious. Stephanie's shrill voice cut through the gasps and murmurs in the crowd. She spun around, her face a twisted mix of horror, rage, and humiliation. "Turn that off. Now!" she screamed, pointing at the AV booth. But the damage was done. The texts, the photos, Every incriminating detail scrolled across the massive screen for all to see. The crowd wasn't kind. Her colleagues whispered furiously among themselves, some shaking their heads in disgust, others outright laughing at the absurdity of the situation. One woman even muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wow! And she acts so high and mighty at work." Mark, the man she'd so proudly betrayed me with, had his own moment of panic. He tried to sneak out the side door, but not before a few people spotted him and started jeering. "There goes the homewrecker," someone shouted. His face turned bright red as he bolted. Stephanie, however, wasn't as quick to flee. She was stuck, paralyzed by the weight of what had just happened. Then, as if realizing she needed to save face, she turned her anger on me. I watched her march across the room toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You," she hissed, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You did this. How dare you humiliate me like this?" I didn't flinch. Instead, I crossed my arms and looked her dead in the eye. "Humiliate you? Stephanie, you did this to yourself. I just gave everyone a front row seat to the truth." She let out a bitter laugh, her voice trembling with anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think this makes you the better person? All you've done is prove how pathetic you are." I stayed calm, refusing to let her bait me. "Pathetic? You mean like sneaking around with Mark behind my back? Like lying to me, gaslighting me, and laughing about it with your friends? No, Stephanie. This is what pathetic looks like." I gestured toward the screen, where one final photo lingered, a selfie of her in our bedroom with Mark sprawled out on our bed. The crowd erupted into gasps again, some people outright laughing. That was the breaking point for her. She slapped me hard across the face. The room went silent again, all eyes on us. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice shaking. "I hope you're happy." I rubbed my cheek, smirking. "Not yet, but I'm getting there." With that, she stormed out of the gala, her head held high, but her dignity in shreds. The crowd didn't stop her. Some people whispered, some laughed, but no one came to her defense. When I got home that night, Stephanie was already there, pacing the living room like a caged animal. She turned on me the moment I walked through the door. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she screamed. "You've ruined my career, my reputation. Everything I've worked for is gone because of you." "Because of me?" I shot back.
No, Stephanie.
"You did this. You ruined your career when you decided to cheat on your husband and flaunt it like it was some kind of game. You ruined your reputation when you made it clear you don't give a damn about anyone but yourself." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You're such a hypocrite. Do you think this makes you a saint? Do you think people are going to see you as the victim? No one cares about your little sob story, John. They're all just going to see a petty, vindictive loser who couldn't handle his wife moving on." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and smiled. "Maybe, but at least now everyone knows who you really are. And you'll have to live with that." She glared at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure of it." "Good luck with that," I said calmly. "Because while you're busy plotting your revenge, I'll be busy moving on with my life." Stephanie tried to act tough, but I could see the cracks starting to form. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from friends offering fake sympathy, others from colleagues who were clearly distancing themselves from her. She ignored most of them, but the stress was obvious. She barely ate, barely slept, and every time she looked at me, it was with a mix of fury and desperation. Meanwhile, I wasted no time putting my final plans into motion. I contacted a divorce attorney and laid everything out. Her affair, the financial situation, the evidence I'd gathered. My lawyer assured me that with everything I had, the divorce would be swift and entirely in my favor. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure Mark felt the fallout, too. A quick search online revealed that Mark was married. His wife, Laura, had no idea what her husband had been up to. I debated whether to involve her. It felt cruel to shatter someone else's life, but ultimately, I decided she deserved to know the truth. I sent her an anonymous email with the screenshots and photos I'd collected, along with a simple note. I thought you should know what your husband has been doing. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. It didn't take long for the chaos to unfold. A few days later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that Laura had kicked Mark out and was filing for divorce. Apparently, she wasn't as forgiving as Stephanie had hoped. The days after the gala felt surreal. Stephanie's carefully curated life was crumbling before her eyes, and for once, she couldn't talk, charm, or lie her way out of it. At first, she tried to act as though she was above it all, parading around the house with feigned indifference. But her mask slipped quickly. The cracks started to show. Her phone calls became frantic. I overheard her talking to Ashley, her best friend from the party, and the desperation in her voice was palpable. "Can you believe what he did to me, Ash?" she hissed into the phone, pacing the living room. "He ruined everything. My boss saw those pictures. HR wants to meet with me on Monday. Like I'm the bad guy here. Mark isn't even answering my calls. He's such a coward." I couldn't help but smirk from the kitchen as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Her words were like music to my ears. For once, Stephanie was facing the consequences of her actions, and I had a front row seat to the meltdown. But it wasn't just work that was falling apart. The social circle she had so carefully cultivated over the years had turned against her. Word about the gala spread fast, and it wasn't long before her so-called friends started distancing themselves. Invitations dried up. Messages went unanswered. Even Ashley, her closest ally, seemed to be keeping her at arm's length. Stephanie tried to play it cool, telling me she didn't care what people thought. But late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her crying softly in the bathroom. And while a part of me felt a pang of sympathy for the woman I once loved, it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. A week after the gala, I was packing up some of my things in the garage when I stumbled across a box I hadn't seen in years. It was one of Stephanie's old storage boxes, labeled in her handwriting, "Miscellaneous, College." I wasn't trying to snoop, but the box was half open, and curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found the usual relics of her younger years, photo albums, old textbooks, and random knickknacks. But tucked beneath a stack of papers was something that made my blood run cold. A journal. I hesitated for a moment, feeling like I was crossing some kind of line. But then I thought about all the lines Stephanie had crossed, all the lies she'd told me. If she had nothing to hide, then there was no harm in reading it. So I opened it. At first, it was harmless enough, entries about college parties, classes, and old friends. But as I flipped through the pages, I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks. An entry dated just a few months before we got engaged. "Mark came over last night. God, he just gets me in a way John never will. He's exciting, passionate, everything John isn't. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. He keeps telling me to break it off with John and just be with him. But I don't know. John's safe, stable. He's the kind of guy you marry. But Mark, he's the kind of guy you dream about. I wish I could have both." I stared at the page, my hands trembling. This wasn't a new betrayal. This had been going on for years, long before we were married. She hadn't just stumbled into an affair. She had been calculating this from the beginning. She saw me as safe, a backup plan while she kept her real passion alive with Mark. The anger I felt before was nothing compared to what I felt now. I'd built a life with this woman, sacrificed for her, and she had been lying to me from the start. My entire marriage had been a sham, and I was just now realizing it. That evening, I confronted Stephanie with the journal. I didn't give her a chance to play dumb. I slammed it down on the coffee table in front of her, open to the incriminating entry. Her eyes widened as she saw it. For once, she looked genuinely afraid. Where did you find that?" she stammered. "In the garage," I said coldly. "And it's a good thing I did, because now I know the truth. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't something that just happened. You've been lying to me since day one. You never even wanted me, did you? I was just the safe choice. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. Don't even try to deny it. It's all right here in your own words. You were cheating on me with Mark before we even got married. You're a liar, Stephanie. A manipulative, selfish liar. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't falling for her act this time. John, it wasn't like that, she said, her voice breaking. I was young and confused. I didn't know what I wanted back then. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare try to spin this. You knew exactly what you were doing. You played me and you played him. You thought you could have your cake and eat it too. And now it's all blowing up in your face. She started to cry in earnest, but it didn't move me. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I made mistakes, but I love you, John. I always have. Please, we can fix this. I laughed bitterly. Love? Don't insult me. You don't know the first thing about love. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Not once, not for years. Her tears quickly turned to anger. Fine, she snapped, wiping her face. You want to paint me as the bad guy? Go ahead. But don't act like you're some perfect saint. You're not exactly exciting, John. You never were. I settled for you because I thought you'd give me a good life. And you did. But God, you're so boring. The words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. There was no saving this marriage. No apology could fix what she'd done. You settled for me? I said quietly, my voice shaking with controlled fury. Well, I guess you'll have to find someone else to settle for, because I'm done. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers will be here soon. She froze, the color draining from her face. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, I said. And just so you know, I've already moved half of our savings into my personal account. You're not getting a dime more than you deserve. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. You can't do this to me, John. You'll ruin me. No, Stephanie, I said, turning to leave. You did that all on your own. Stephanie's panicked voice followed me as I walked upstairs to our bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it. Not because I feared her, but because I didn't want to hear another word of her excuses, manipulation, or desperate pleas. She'd said enough, done enough, and there was no coming back from it. I could hear her pacing downstairs, muttering angrily to herself, sometimes crying, sometimes shouting. It was a symphony of chaos that I no longer cared to orchestrate. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace, even amidst the storm. The decision was made. I was done. Stephanie was uncharacteristically quiet the next morning. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee absently, her face pale and puffy from crying. I didn't say a word to her as I grabbed a cup for myself. The silence between us was deafening, but it felt like a necessary part of the process. She had already destroyed everything. Now she had to sit in the ruins. I know you hate me, she finally said, her voice low and shaky. But I don't think you understand how much I've sacrificed for this marriage. I nearly choked on my coffee. Sacrificed.
I echoed, glaring at her.
You've got to be kidding me. What exactly did you sacrifice, Stephanie? Your integrity? Your loyalty? Because it sure as hell wasn't your time with Mark. She flinched at the mention of his name. You don't get it, John. You've always been so rigid, so focused on doing the right thing. I've had to give up so much just to keep us together. And yeah, maybe I made mistakes, but I was unhappy. I was lonely. Lonely? I barked out a bitter laugh. You mean while I was working my ass off to give us a good life? While you were out with your friends and sneaking around with Mark? Spare me the sob story, Stephanie. You don't get to play the victim here. Her face hardened, the tears disappearing in an instant. You know what? Fine. If you're so perfect, go ahead and leave. But don't think you'll get away with taking everything from me. I'll fight you in court if I have to. Her words confirmed what I'd suspected all along. This wasn't about love or regret. This was about control. She didn't want to lose her comfortable life, her reputation, or the power she thought she had over me. But she was about to learn that she'd already lost all of it. That evening, Stephanie made one final, desperate attempt to regain control. I came home from a meeting with my lawyer to find her in the kitchen, cooking dinner, a rare occurrence. She'd set the table with candles, flowers, and a bottle of expensive wine, the kind she usually saved for company. "Hey," she said softly, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought we could have dinner together, talk things through." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What's there to talk about? You've made your choices, Stephanie, and I've made mine." She sighed, stepping closer to me. "John, I know I've messed up. I've been selfish, cruel even. But I don't want to lose you. We've been through so much together. Can't we try to fix this? For us?" Her voice wavered, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the journal. The way she'd mocked me to her friends and flaunted her affair with Mark. Whatever love I'd once felt for her had been buried under the weight of her betrayal. "No," I said firmly, stepping back. "We can't fix this, Stephanie. You destroyed it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything's fine just because you're afraid of facing the consequences." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying again. But then her expression shifted into something colder, darker. "You're really going to throw everything away over a few mistakes?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Fine. If that's how you want it, don't expect me to make this easy for you." True to her word, Stephanie didn't go down without a fight. She called her own lawyer the next day and started making demands. Half of everything, the house, the cars, even the savings I'd moved into my private account. She told anyone who would listen that I was the villain, that I'd humiliated her and ruined our marriage out of spite. But her attempts to paint herself as the victim didn't go as planned. Thanks to the gala and the evidence I'd gathered, most people already knew the truth. Her colleagues, friends, and even her own family began to distance themselves. It wasn't long before she realized that her usual tactics, charm, manipulation, playing the martyr, weren't working anymore. One night, I came home to find her packing her things into boxes. She didn't look at me as I walked through the door. "I'm leaving," she said flatly. "I can't stay here anymore." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. Part of me wanted to gloat, to remind her that this was her own doing. But another part of me just felt tired. Tired of the lies, the fights, the constant roller coaster of emotions. All I wanted was peace. As Stephanie moved out, she left behind a trail of forgotten belongings. Old clothes, shoes, papers. While sorting through her things, I found another surprise. An envelope tucked inside one of her drawers. It was addressed to her in Mark's handwriting. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a letter, and what I read made my blood boil all over again. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the letter in my hands feeling heavier than it had any right to be. Mark's handwriting was sloppy and rushed, like he'd scrawled it out without much thought, maybe without realizing I'd one day be the one reading it. I unfolded the paper and began to read. Each word hit me like a fresh wound being torn open. Mark's letter. "Steph, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. You keep telling me you're going to leave him, but it's been years, and nothing's changed. I'm tired of sneaking around, tired of playing second fiddle to some clueless guy you don't even love. I've given you everything, but you keep stringing me along, telling me to wait. For what? So you can keep living your perfect little life while I get scraps of your time? I deserve better than this, Steph. We both know it. If you're not serious about us, then just say so. But if you are, it's time to stop playing games. Leave him. Be with me. For real this time." Mark. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking with rage. Mark's letter confirmed what I'd already suspected. Stephanie hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been juggling us both for years, playing us against each other to keep her options open. She'd strung Mark along while using me as her safety net, her stable choice. She'd lied to us both, manipulated us both, and now she was scrambling to salvage what little control she had left. I couldn't believe the audacity. Even after everything, I'd still held on to some shred of hope that Stephanie had been truthful about something. Anything. But this letter proved she'd never been honest. Not with me, not with Mark, not even with herself. That night, I waited for Stephanie to come back to the house to finish packing. When she walked through the door, she looked exhausted, like the weight of her crumbling life was finally catching up to her. But I didn't feel an ounce of pity. "We need to talk," I said, holding up the letter. Her eyes widened when she saw it, and for a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face. Then, like clockwork, she composed herself, her expression shifting to one of indifference. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her tone icy. "In your drawer," I replied. "Care to explain?" She shrugged, tossing her bag onto the couch. "It's nothing. Just Mark being dramatic, as usual." "Dramatic?" I said, my voice rising. "He's begging you to leave me, Stephanie. He's tired of being your backup plan. And honestly, I can't blame him. You've been lying to both of us this whole time." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't act like you care about Mark's feelings. This isn't about him. It's about you needing to feel like the victim." I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "You're unbelievable. You've ruined 2 lives, no 3 if you count Mark's wife, and you still refuse to take responsibility for any of it. All you do is deflect and blame everyone else. But guess what? I'm done. Done with your lies, your manipulation, your games. You're on your own now." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "You want me gone? Then I'll go. But don't think you're walking away from this scot-free. You've humiliated me, John. And I promise, I'll make sure you pay for it." I laughed bitterly. "You're not in a position to threaten anyone, Stephanie. The world already knows who you are. Good luck finding someone else to put up with your crap." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of her own making. The next day, I received an unexpected message from Laura, Mark's wife. She'd gotten my anonymous email and wanted to thank me for telling her the truth. But she also had something to share. Mark had been fired from his job after his boss found out about the affair. Apparently, Stephanie wasn't the only one whose professional life had been obliterated. "He tried to come crawling back to me," Laura wrote, "but I told him to go to hell. Good riddance." Her words brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. Stephanie and Mark had destroyed so much, but at least Laura and I were starting to reclaim some control over our lives. When Stephanie and I finally sat down with our lawyers to finalize the divorce, she tried one last desperate move to grab as much as she could. She demanded half the house, half the savings, and even spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her career for our marriage. But my lawyer was ready. With the mountain of evidence I'd gathered, including Mark's letter, the texts, and the photos, Stephanie didn't stand a chance. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me the house and the majority of our assets. Stephanie walked away with far less than she'd hoped for, and the look on her face when the decision was announced was priceless. As a final touch, I decided to sell the house. The same house where Stephanie had carried out her affair, and donate part of the proceeds to a charity that supported victims of infidelity and emotional abuse. It was my way of turning the pain she'd caused into something positive, something meaningful. I left a note for Stephanie before I moved out. "This is what moving on looks like. I hope one day you learn what it means to truly love someone. But I doubt you ever will." The day Stephanie finally moved out of the house, there was no big showdown, no dramatic exit. She loaded her belongings into the back of a moving van, barely meeting my gaze as she slammed the door shut. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of her presence lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just the physical space. It was the emotional void she left behind. And for once, that void didn't feel suffocating. Felt like freedom. After the house was sold and I'd moved into a new apartment across town, I started piecing my life back together. First, everything felt surreal. I'd spent so long walking on eggshells around Stephanie, bending over backward to keep her happy, that I'd almost forgotten who I was without her. Now, with nothing tying me to her, I had to rediscover myself. Healing wasn't easy. There were nights when the anger and betrayal crept back in, nights when I lay awake replaying everything in my mind. The laughter at the party, the texts, the journal, Mark's letter, felt like a storm I couldn't escape. But then I'd remind myself that the worst was over. I was free now, and Stephanie no longer had any power over me. I threw myself into things I'd neglected during our marriage, hobbies, friendships, even work. I started going to the gym, not because of her cruel remarks about my appearance, but because I wanted to feel strong again. I reached out to old friends I hadn't seen in years, people Stephanie had pushed out of my life with her manipulative ways. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild. Therapy helped too. Talking to someone who wasn't emotionally involved gave me a new perspective. My therapist helped me see that Stephanie's actions weren't about me. They were about her own insecurities and selfishness. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me let go of the guilt I'd been carrying, the nagging feeling that maybe I hadn't been enough. The last time I heard from Stephanie was a few months after the divorce was finalized. She sent me a text out of the blue. "I hope you're doing well. I know things ended badly between us, but I just want you to know I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you the way I did." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to unleash all the anger I still felt, to remind her of every cruel thing she'd said and done. But another part of me realized it didn't matter anymore. Her apology, whether genuine or not, didn't change anything. I didn't need her remorse to move on, so I deleted the message without replying. That was the real closure I needed. Not forgiving her, not reconciling, but simply letting her go. A year after the divorce, my life looked completely different. I'd moved to a new city, started a new job, and even adopted a dog. A scrappy little mutt named Max who'd been abandoned at a shelter. He was my constant companion, always ready with a wagging tail and a goofy grin that reminded me life could still be good. I'd also started dating again, cautiously at first. The idea of trusting someone new was terrifying, but I knew I couldn't let Stephanie's betrayal define me forever. I met someone, her name was Rachel, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. She was kind, honest, and nothing like Stephanie. She didn't play games or manipulate. She simply showed up, fully herself. And for now, that was enough. Looking back on everything, I can see how blind I was. I ignored the red flags, made excuses for Stephanie's behavior, and let her gaslight me into doubting my own instincts. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone reading this, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let love blind you to someone's true character. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, where betrayal and lies have shattered your world, remember this: it's not your fault. You deserve better. It's okay to walk away, to let go of someone who doesn't value you. It's painful, yes, but sometimes letting go is the only way to find yourself again. Stephanie and Mark were just blips in the grand scheme of my life, painful lessons I had to learn. But they didn't break me. If anything, they made me stronger. They taught me what I don't want in a partner, what I won't tolerate, and most importantly, what I deserve. Now, as I sit here writing this, Max curled up at my feet, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've been in years. The scars are still there, but they're just reminders of how far I've come. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. To anyone reading this who's struggling with betrayal, heartbreak, or the aftermath of a toxic relationship, you will get through this. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but one day you'll wake up and realize the storm has passed. And when that day comes, you'll see that you're stronger than you ever thought possible.